course, for many years in African American history, race was synonymous with community. As a matter of fact, many of our predecessors considered themselves raised women and raised men. Billie Holiday, for example, called herself a raised woman, indicating that she opposed racism and supported the race. As a child growing up in the South, my own assumption was that should anyone in the community come under attack, it was my responsibility to support that person, to support the race. I was just telling my students the other day that in 1970, when I was in jail, someone had told me in 1991 that a black man who said that Malcolm X was one of his heroes, was nominated to the Supreme Court, I would have celebrated. I don't think it would have been possible to convince me at that time that I would be absolutely opposed to a black candidate. And if someone had told me a woman had finally been elected to the Supreme Court, it would have been very difficult, as critical as I am to feminism, to imagine opposing her. I don't think you could have convinced me that things would so have absolutely shifted that someone could evoke the specter of lynching on national television in a way that will violate our history. Yeah, I think we need to look at the racism behind the staging of the sexual harassment story with the black woman and the black man as the actors. I mean, Ted Kennedy was sitting right there, and it never occurred to anyone to bring him up on charges for his past indiscretions. Actually, we in our various oppressed and marginalized communities have been able to turn terrible acts of racism directed against us into victories. Anita Hill achieved a victory by showing the courage to expose sexual harassment on a national level. This is a very complicated situation, but I have no problem aligning myself politically against Clarence Thomas. I'm very passionate about that. But at the same time, we need to think about the racism that made the Thomas Hill hearings possible. So I think we need to find new ways of looking at community. Race, in the old sense, is becoming an increasingly obsolete way of constructing communities because it's based on immutable biological facts in a pseudo-scientific way. Now, this does not mean we ignore racism. Racism is at the origin of this concept of race. It's not the other way around. They were not racists. There's one race who suddenly came to dominate all the others. As a matter of fact, in order for European colonialists to attempt to conquer the world, to colonize the world, they had to construct this notion that the Earth population was divided into firm biological communities, and that is what I think we need to go back and consider. So when I use the word race, now I put it in quotations, because if we don't transform this intransigent, rigid notion of race, we will continue the cycle of genocidal violence, which is at the origin of our history. So I think I'm convinced, and this is what I'm working on in my political practice right now, that we need to find different ways of coming together. Not the old coalition in which we anchor ourselves very solidly in our specific racialized communities and simply voice our solidarity with other people. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't anchor ourselves in our community. I feel very anchored in my various communities. But I think, to use a metaphor, the rope attached to the anchor should be long enough to allow us to move into other communities, to understand and learn. I've been thinking a lot about this need to make more intimate these connections and associations to really take on the responsibility of learning. So we need to find ways of understanding the vastness of the many cultural heritages, ways of coming together without rendering invisible all of our heterogeneity. I don't have all the answers, but what I'm interested in is communities that are not static, that can change, that can respond to new historical needs. It's a very exciting moment.